Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar with very special guest Pratik and also Bella. If you don't know who you're listening to, my name is, hang on, that's Bella. My name is David. I'm part of the software sales team based out of Copenhagen in Denmark. And then with us, we have Pratik and Bella. So we're just going to attempt, through the power of the internet, to share the webcam so we can just say hello for a second. So if we're lucky, we should have the webcam up. So hopefully you can see us. So myself, David, here on the left, Pratik in the middle, and Bella on the right-hand side. So basically what we're going to do today is that we've divided up this webinar into two different sections. So we've got 60 minutes with Pratik and myself, where we're going to look at basically the color workflow of Capture One and a few other things. And also, as I understand, you got a ton of images from people.
We have a lot of images.
Yeah.
Actually, we got so many from the community, so I wanted to spend some time going through quite a bit of them.
Yeah, so we've got a bunch of images to look at. I'm afraid we probably won't be able to look at every single image that came through, unfortunately, but that's the goal. And then so to keep that first hour sort of strictly about Capture One and so on, we're then going to have another half an hour where we can just open up for general talk about the business of retouching. We've got Bella here, Pratik's partner as well. Of course, they work closely together. So we can take other questions on working in the business and so on and so forth. You're very welcome and encouraged to ask questions throughout. Some of you have already figured out how to do that. If you haven't, if you look at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel, you'll see the last section is called questions. So put a question in there that will come straight through to us. If you're on your Android device or iOS device, there's a question mark icon on the app itself, and just tap that, and again a question will come through to us. Please try to keep them on topic. There is a lot of you on today, in the hundreds. Yeah. So of course we won't be able to answer every single question, so we just pick out questions that kind of make sense to, you know, the general population of who's watching and so on. So please don't be disappointed if you don't get your personal question answered. So we're going to say, let's begin. Just going to exit out of this and we'll say goodbye on the webcam for a minute so we don't distract you with our lovely faces. Hand the pen over to Pratik and I'll hand over to you, basically. So just let us know if you have any sound issues or anything like that, and then I'll do my best to update. Physically now, Wade was just asking, just to make that clear, we're actually all in the UK.
We are.
At the moment. Yes.
Yeah, although I'm in the UK now, I'm based out of Houston, Texas. I travel quite a bit for work, as you may have noticed, but we are all currently based in Oxford at this time while we're presenting.
Yep.
Ultimately, the first thing that I do want to mention is that this is not an introduction to Capture One course. You can find a lot of information on how to get started and set up with Capture One through a few sources, one of them being the Phase One's YouTube channel, or the Capture One YouTube channel. As well as Dave has a class on Creative Live. I have a class on RGG EDU for Capture One, so there's a lot of material out there now to get started, as well as tethering, as well as processing. So I'd recommend highly checking those out as well, and we can send an email out for people who want that information following this tutorial or this webinar. Now, this specific webinar is on color. This is all about color and processing of the tools you can use if you're not familiar with the tools, as well as for those who are already using some of the tools in Capture One, to give you more ideas on how to use them. So it spans a wide range of people who know how to use the program, people who are just getting into it, and I hope you can pick up something from this tutorial as well. Now, the reason I actually wanted to do this because color is the most requested thing that I get asked about the program, and it's something that I want to talk over in terms of the overview of the tools we're going to cover, as well as in-depth material. Now, when I first put a request out there on images that people should submit, they actually gave me quite a few of them. So like David mentioned, we're not going to get through all of them, but there's a lot of good ones to use as examples. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about briefly is an overview of the tools we're going to cover in this webinar. And the first one is going to be using this example by Bella, who conveniently is here today as well, which she will be joining us at the end for our Q&A session. Now, the biggest tool that I prefer using when it comes to color toning and color balancing is none other than the color balance tool, which we'll cover in depth. But the reason for this is before using Capture One, I actually had a really hard time color toning images, primarily because it was really hard to have a tool that really is a visual representation of modifying colors. And I like this because it's really easy to use. It's very self-explanatory. You can see here we have the shadow, midtone, and highlight tabs. And it's a very visual process. So for instance, if we want to tone the shadows, we simply adjust the influence and go to the direction in which we feel that we need to go. So if you have a particular preference, you would just go to the color that you like to go. And on the left and right hand tab over here, we have different sliders that make it easier as well in terms of saturation value, intensity, as well as lightness of the region. So the shadow and the shadow area, I should say, has a intensity of how bright or dark it is, which is just a convenience thing to have. The next thing is obviously it has different interpretations of midtones, which you can modify really easily. And again, like I mentioned, we're going to be going in depth into these as well as some fine examples on each of these topics. The next thing is the highlights, which is also the same kind of process, which is no problem. Now, the next tool that I find really convenient is the color editor. Now, with a color editor, I'm going to use this example by Elmo Lee, who provided some stunning studio images on this as well as we get into it. But with a color editor, with a quick overview, this tool itself allows you to fine-tune specific colors by just selecting them. For instance, you have this advanced tab here, which you can simply click on the color picker, select the color that you want to modify, and then shift over the type or the hue itself, so you can have a more red dominance as you go to the left, and on the right you have more of a beige or green dominance. And you can see here at the bottom where you have the selected color, as well as the intended changes that you've made using the sliders themselves. So it's pretty self-explanatory, and this is as simple as it's going to get going forward, because we're going to get pretty advanced. And even better, we can reset this over here. Next, you'll see the skin tone tab here, which is really useful because you can harmonize skin tones. So if you had variations in the skin, for example, you have a red cast here and a neutral cast here, you simply select the skin tone that you want and use these sliders to make them all more cohesive. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to be going into in-depth examples on how to do this, so just keep that in mind as we just generally talk about these tools. The next tool that we're going to talk about more in depth is going to be going to the next tab, which is our main color tab. You'll see here that it has the standard levels. It also has the curves, which has the RGB curves, just like you would see in any other program that has curves. But more importantly, it has a luma curve. Now, the luma curve is different from the RGB curve in that the luma curve, as you may have guessed, affects just luminosity primarily without changing the saturation levels or the contrast levels of the color. So for instance, if I go ahead and bring down my shadows over here, you notice that the saturation of the entire image isn't affected. This is going to come into importance, especially when you start building colors and you start building a palette without wanting to affect the entire color scheme that you've created. Typically, an issue that happens for me is that anytime I create a color tone or a color grade across a series of images or a particular image and want to tweak the curve itself, it tends to affect the contrast. And this is where the luma curve is independent from the RGB curve, because then you can manually adjust the luminosity of the color palette that you've created.
And if I can interrupt,
absolutely,
I think that's a really good point, because with traditional RGB curves, let's say you've arrived at a a situation you're happy with, but you just want to tweak the contrast. With a traditional RGB curve, you can't, or you're more limited. So then you're kind of fighting different adjustments against each other, and what Pratik's doing here is a great example of that. But with the luminosity only, you've got this great way of adjusting contrast without affecting your color. So just to make that clear, luminosity only. If your color is locked in, then you can make those contrast changes without affecting exactly as you see now.
That is a great point, because right now you see here that in the luma curve itself, you saw that the changes to contrast have been applied, except the saturation hasn't shifted. And that is a huge benefit to me for obvious reasons, as you can see from the RGB changes we've done with our standard curve. And you know, this algorithm or engine, or however they did their magic on the back end, it's really spectacular. And we can use these as we build our layers in Capture One as well, and that we're going to get into. So that's a great point. The next part that I think, which is really exceptional, is using layers in the local adjustment brush section, because here you have the standard tools, except now you can build them, you can mask certain elements, and I want to show you practical examples of that. Aside from that, you do have your standard white balance tools. Over here, you can see you can adjust your Kelvin and your tint. You also have a black and white conversion option, in case you'd like to do that, and so forth. You also have a basic tab under your color editor, but that's if you want to do quick changes that isolate colors quite easily. The other advantage of this color editor tab is on the advanced section, as well as the skin tone tab, you have what is known as the ability to modify the selection. So as we did before, we've selected a particular area of the skin. If we go ahead and say view selected color range, what it does is desaturates everything that we don't want selected. So as you see here, we've selected a beige and any neighboring color. So if I go and pull that out of here, just like a typical palette, and expand it over, I'm going to show you gently how to see what we've selected here. So this point in the middle here illustrates the point we've selected with our color picker, but then it also shows us the surrounding colors that get highlighted. For instance, this edge here, which is soft because of this smoothness slider, shows you that we've also selected some of the lipstick here. We can start by bringing in the smoothness so that the transition is a lot sharper. And you can see what happens here is when we do that, it ends up cutting into it because there's no smoothness in gradient. So if we bring that up, we can also adjust these parameters here to select simply just the skin. And just like that, we've selected most of the skin tones without affecting the lipstick. Now, in case that doesn't always work, we have layers that we're going to incorporate, but that's something to keep in mind. Now, before I get into really complex examples using the color editor, I'm going to go ahead and reset this, and we're going to jump into some prime examples. So I'm going to go up to my library tab. I'm going to click on all images. And first and foremost, again, I want to thank everybody who actually submitted some of their images, because we got quite a few of them.
Very many.
Yeah, rightfully so, because they're quite, they're quite beautiful from all over the world. So I want to thank everyone specifically for those of you who submitted, from beauty shots to fashion images that span a wide range of colors, whether it be neutral shots. We have, ones of beautiful penguins from Antarctica, from George, Elmo Lee, we have Duncan Chang, Bryce Chapman, and so forth. So thanks everyone again, and let's get into this. Now over here, I already went ahead and starred some of these images that we are going to be covering today that I think are beneficial to some examples I want to drive through, especially for working photographers that have common issues. The first thing that I want to show here is the color editor. Now with the color editor itself, let me go ahead and reset this really quickly. The color editor itself, if you are a landscape photographer, or if you are a photographer that works in fantasy like Bella does, The color editor is really amazing because it allows you to actually select colors in the background. For instance, in this example, let's say that we are going to be selecting some of the leaves and we want to change specifically the leaves color. If you didn't have the color picker here and you had to manually mask out everything, it would take quite a while in Photoshop to do. Or if you want to fine-tune them, it's harder to do that without having this in your raw processor. So for instance, in our advanced section in our color editor, we have used a color picker to basically pick the color we want modified. And you can see every time I use a color picker, it adds another quote-unquote layer to the selection. So I can go in and pick any one I want, turn them visible or invisible. So let's say I use this last color that I selected. I can then use this hue rotation and then simply change the impact of the color and how it's being interpreted. I can also change saturation. And I can also select multiple colors. So if I select the green over here, which is a stronger green, I can say view selected color range, and you can see the flowers that are selected or the leaves that are selected, and then adjust the hue rotation accordingly. And just like that, we've gone from from green, I'm colorblind apparently, from green to more of a fall-like colors. Yeah, I would say more of a fall-like color. I can adjust the interpretation of the saturation. And if I don't like that, I can adjust it on the fly. I can also go back to the previous selection that we did and then modify that way, increase the saturation, and effectively just create a more fantasy-based feel. I can maybe select some of the hair as well. I can increase the lightness. And so, it allows you to do a lot of things that are not specifically just skin tone related, which I think is quite beneficial to people who want to just quickly modify individual colors. Now, the next topic that I want to address is something that's more relevant to all of us, and that's going to be skin tones as it relates to models and subjects. Now, over here on the Color Editor tab, we briefly talked about the fact that this skin tone tab has the power to make colors more harmonious through the range of the skin tone. So over here we have the subject, and you can see the skin itself is quite neutral, base, warm, but we have the hands here that don't look so hot, or I should say they look really hot. Either way, we want to fix that because that I don't think is a good look, especially in shooting in studio. You have blood flow issues, and what happens is typically you can come over here, select the actual color picker, and sample the skin tone that you like. Keep in mind that this broadcast is going to be uploaded later on, so in case you don't follow something, don't worry, because you can revisit this many times as you want. I just want to pack as much good information as possible. So let's say I use a color picker and actually select her skin tone. You know you've done this accurately because once you've done this, you'll see that the selection here is activated. This shows you, like I mentioned before, the color we've selected and the colors neighboring that selection, so we have a nice gradation. You can also bring that in case you don't want anything else selected. So let's zoom in and show you what happens. Now that we've selected the color that we want modified, or the color range we want modified, we can come over here to the uniformity tab or the uniformity sliders, because this is where the magic really happens, especially if you have Capture 110, because they've sectioned this off into hue, saturation, and lightness. If you are not familiar with hue, saturation, and lightness, that's basically what color is. So for instance, if we first and foremost adjust our hue, you'll notice that, and I'll turn this on and off really quick, is if you go ahead and come up top here to the reset dialog box and hit option and then click on it without letting go of option, you can see a before and after example of what happens. What happens is if I turn this on and off temporarily, is the hand itself becomes harmonious with the rest of the skin tone. Now, this might be great, but we don't want to do it to a full extent because the subjects typically will have subtle variations across the skin. So maybe doing up to 30% or 35% is a good idea. Next, we also have the saturation uniformity slider. So what that basically means is that whatever color we've selected initially, it's going to try and create the same saturation level across the entire range. So let's go ahead and try it out. So I'm going to bring over the saturation. And if I go ahead and turn that again on and off, you'll notice that along with the hue itself, the saturation tries to become a bit more similar. There's also a lightness tab. But if we increase that, you'll notice that now the luminosity will also shift to cater to the midpoint that we selected. And you'll know it's accurate because you'll see the shadows on the arm become flat. You'll see the highlights also become flat. And you don't necessarily want this on the skin, especially if you've done a really good job of making sure the lighting is accurate. So I tend to not do that for skin.
It's the Instagram filter.
Yeah. If you want a smooth skin, do this. No, don't. I'm just kidding. Oh my God. Don't. I have a feeling.
Use with care.
Yeah. Please use with care. People ask me, where can you use something like this? Well, to be honest, I think the problem presents itself depending on the situation. So keep that in mind. You know, you have a variant array of tools in your toolbox, and tools like this really help you. So let's say that we go ahead and use that color editor tab specifically for skin tones. That's a really useful tab for me because I think first and foremost, this saves me a lot of time in post-production. I don't have to fix this later when I'm doing my retouching. I can fix it now and adjust it accordingly. Another question that I get quite often, what if this affects more than just the range I want to fix? Well, that's why masking is also there. So in case you have a really difficult time pinpointing the exact color you want to modify without affecting anything else, maybe the subject has garments that has a similar skin tone, that has a similar color as a skin tone. How can you stop that from happening? Well, let me show you really quickly. Now, the reason I actually went over this first is so I can show you exactly how to use it. Now I'm going to come over to the local adjustments tab here where the brush icon is. I'm going to select a new layer really quickly here with a plus sign. I'll call this fixing the hand. Now the way Capture One works is that by default, if I make any changes at the moment, it's not going to show anything, because effectively it's just loading the settings for the brush that we're going to be using. So that I can show you a visual representation of what's happening, I'm going to quickly invert the default mask. The way that I do that is over here on the layer itself. Once I've created that layer, I'm going to right click and hit invert mask. You won't see anything just yet, but if I now come down to this color editor and then go into the skin tone tab itself, I can use the color picker, sample the color that I like, and now if I drag the uniformity over, you'll see everything is being affected like we did before. Now if I want to just fix the hand itself, I'm going to invert the mask again and start painting so that only the hand is going to be fixed. So I'll come back up to my local adjustments, invert mask. And now with the brush tool itself, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to right click to make sure my size and setting are okay. You can also use your bracket keys for your size. And over here I have my flow and opacity, so I'll probably keep it to about 13% flow, which is quite gentle, 100% opacity. I'll bring the flow down just a little bit. Now when I start brushing on the image here, you'll see that only the hand has been corrected. So I know this because if I go back to my layer and check and uncheck, you'll see that the hand is being affected. As you notice, there's a little bit of the background contamination happening. There's also the eraser brush as well. You can come over here, use the eraser brush. It also has its own settings, and you can simply go ahead and adjust it accordingly. Especially if you have a Wacom tablet, it makes it really easy to just quickly brush over as well. And there's also different options for masking. So you can say always display mask. As you can see here, my really bad masking job. Masterpiece. Or you can say only display mask when drawing, so that it doesn't show up all the time, but only when you want to start masking really precisely. It allows you to do so. And I should say it's actually quite fast, makes it really easy. And that's a great way of using layers as your functionality for adjusting skin tones and vice versa. The best part about this is you can do multiple layers, so in case you want to change colors in varied areas, so maybe the hair needs to be fixed, maybe into exposure changes and so forth and so on. Do you have any questions on that?
Yes, I'm going to interrupt you with a couple of questions. Says he. I just have to find the one I first flagged. Good question from Zohar. Sorry if I haven't said your name correctly.
That's right, Zohar.
Zohar. How much difference is there to doing the color work on the raw in Capture One as opposed to doing it in Photoshop later? I'm always afraid that I will regret something in the later stage.
Yes, color regret.
Yeah,
we have color regret meetings every Tuesday at 8. So here's two situations that I get from clients quite a bit. Number one is that whenever they ask me to do any color toning work, specifically we need to talk about this before we do anything at all. And the reason for this is simple. In the raw processing stage, you actually have a lot of leverage when it comes to color, because just like you have your raw processor when it comes to exposure, as you may be very well aware, with exposure you have a lot of data in the raw file that you can take advantage of, especially because this is a really powerful tool that we have in this day and age that we didn't have before. You can save and rescue data, you can bring back data, so forth and so on. So the raw processor takes advantage of that, and that's why using layers in the raw processor is great. But if you do it in Photoshop, it doesn't have as much leverage because everything typically is baked in. But if you are going to be doing it later, export them out as 16-bit TIFF files, preferably in Adobe RGB. But that is again based on your client. So again, it's that you do have less leverage doing it after the fact, but doing it before the fact, you can bring out a lot more information in the raw processor stage if possible.
And question from, it's an easy answer, from Lorenzo, about using the curves, so RGB, luma, red, green and blue. Does it always affect the whole image? No.
No, it doesn't. So when we get into actually building looks with curves, which I think we'll do next, I'm going to show you that answer that question.
Good stuff. Yeah, this is a question which always comes up when people show the technique you just did about what's the purpose of inverting the mask before doing anything.
Brilliant question.
Yeah.
So let me show you for firsthand. If I did a new layer like I did before, and let's say, for example, I do the same thing that we've done. Let me turn off the layer beforehand. If I don't invert that layer to begin with, and I go through the same process, I select the color picker, I select the tone that I want, I adjust my hue uniformity, you notice nothing happens. And this is dangerous because of the fact that if you're not sure how far to push the uniformity tab or what color you selected, and then you start masking, what tends to happen is you're playing guesswork. You're not really sure of exactly how much to go and what you've done. So it's just a matter of preference. After a while, you might not even need to invert the mask to begin with, but in the beginning, I think it's really valuable to invert the mask so that you can see exactly what levels you've manipulated the original parameters.
Yeah, and it's actually a good technique you can use for other things, like I've seen people who print, make a layer like a printing layer if they want to just add a bit of extra contrast for printing, but not for web use. You can use it for dodging and burning. So if you make your dodge and burn layer, like you would have seen with a recent webinar, then you can see, okay, I want to darken these areas by this much, and then you'll invert the mask so you can see what's happening, then you'll invert it back, and then start doing your brush work. So it has all kinds of uses.
There we go. So you just, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Perfect.
And you can shortcut key it as well.
Yes. So speaking of which, Let me show you one quick other example. Again, this is going to be by Bella. I want to talk about building a look using layers, levels, curves, and the entire color gamut.
Great.
Now, one question that I think gets predominantly asked, especially going off of the local adjustment brush, is how can we use curves, which came up earlier, to build a look in specific. Now, it's funny because Bella's sitting here next to me watching, and she's probably horrified at the color look that I'm going to do with her work. But I'm going to do it anyway. So let's say we have a lot of creatives like to build their color work using layers. And it's really useful because it feels like home when they're working in the retouching stage, and you can go back and forth. So let's say we want to create a specific tone just for the background, or maybe we want to create a base tone. So we can use layers accordingly. So let's say maybe we do base layer here as the first one. We'll go ahead and invert this to start because we want to do this as a global change. Now, I think the big thing about creating color tones in Photoshop is, or I should say in Capture One, is aside from whatever program that you use, you want to have a ground base of the direction you want to go. There's two ways of operating this. The first way is having a color palette. Now, let's say we actually pick a simpler image before we get to Bella's. We're actually going to use one from Tina Eisen, who is a photographer based here in the UK and was very courteous enough to lend some of her beautiful beauty images for this example. So let's say, for example, we go back to our layers and we want to create a quick color tone based on the colors that are predominantly in the image. This is one way to go about it, because you can use colors to emphasize whatever's there to start with, or you can use colors to act as a foreground singer instead of a background singer. And by that I mean, as a background singer, you can have colors be very subtle and really complements the photography, or you can have colors create and evoke a particular mood that's more aggressive than the base image. So for example, people ask me, like, how do you know what color tone to use? I think first and foremost, if you don't have a particular palette in mind, if you're not sure what mood to evoke, then don't just start using colors haphazardly. Have a game plan before you start using it. Maybe have some references. For me, I like to use the references that are already in the picture. So this is where something like using the color tones that are in the image is really useful, because here we have pinks, we have gold tones, we have yellow tones that we could push even further. So for instance, we have something like the color editor we can use. We also have curves. So let's say we use our curves to do that process. We can go ahead and say, you know what, well, first and foremost, I want the color to be a lot stronger. So I'll go here to my exposure tab, decrease my saturation a little bit, make sure my mask is inverted. And what this does is the colors in the base file aren't as strong to begin with. Everything we do with the colors themselves will stand out a lot more. Let's pretend, for example, we'll start with the blue channel here. And a typical color scheme that we usually do is we'll add warmth to the highlights, and we will increase the cold tones in the shadows and see how that looks and get a play and feel of that. We can bring back the saturation levels up a little bit as well, in case that's too much. We can also go into our green tab and see whatever we want to bring out. I think I want to bring out these magenta tones here. So with the green channel, we can adjust the curve and modify this and see what we like. And the best thing is this is so powerful that we don't have to push this intensely. Any minor changes does a grand sweeping change of the entire image as well. I always play with these regions here on the curve. We have the areas of highlights. If we push and pull, what tends to happen is it modifies the highlights. Over here, based on our histogram, it seems like most of the information seems to be closer to the midtones or is pushed in. So I can bring this point down here, so it affects the shadows more, and I can bring this point in here to affect the midtones. If I bring the curve down, you can add a lot more magenta tones. And if I bring it up, I can have more green tones. I can also change the visibility of the layer. So you can see here in just one quick tone, just one quick curve, I'm able to add a really nice subtle interpretation. And then on top of that, if I want to make contrast changes or exposure changes, I can simply go and add another layer, invert the mask, and adjust my contrast separately. Or I can go into my luma curve, which then won't impact the color at all, and do a beautiful typical S curve that impacts the individual luminosity. Now, in case there are specific areas that are too strong, maybe, let's see here, let's turn this on and off. Maybe I feel like I'm losing the shadows a little bit. I can also bring back the curve here. Or if I keep it really dark, I can simply just use my standard brush, change my size, and flow is set normally. I'll just come over here and bring back, I should say erase some of the hair. I'll also turn off my masking really quickly.
It's interesting actually that because of your Photoshop background, and I've seen this before, you tend to do everything in layers.
Yeah.
Very little on the background.
That's right.
Yeah, so that you always have the ability to punch a hole in that mask as you're doing now to remove something, or turn it off if that was a mistake or you have a second thought. And it's interesting, whereas people without the Photoshop background, like myself, well, a very old Photoshop background, tend to do stuff on the background first and then build in layers. But actually building in layers as a default is actually quite a smart idea.
Especially when it comes to things like exposure. For example, let's say you want to create more emphasis on the flowers, right? Maybe the highlights are too bright, or maybe you want to bring up the saturation. We could do the same thing here. We just add another layer, we invert the mask, maybe decrease the exposure, increase the saturation a little bit. Actually, that's too much, too little. I'll invert the mask again and simply build tones that way. And then what tends to happen is I can selectively bring points of interest based on color and contrast accordingly. So that's something really fascinating that we typically would do with layers and creating looks. Because with this, I can then send this to a client and show them exactly what I have in mind. And in case they're not sold on it, I can undo everything without losing my mind on how to bring back the sliders or whatever it may be. The other really neat thing about Capture One is I can create a new variant as well. So say that I want to do a quick little before and after. I have different variants that I could do. Let me just bring that up here really quickly. We'll go back down to Tina really quick. Let's see, where did it go? Ah, there we go. I need to make sure that my stars are all selected here. Here we go. So I created two variants here. This is the before effectively, and this is kind of the after. Kind of subtle changes, and again, just based on whatever it is that you like to do as a user. But that's how I kind of use layers to play with that. The other thing that I like to use layers for specifically is, well, actually, let me backtrack here a bit. Another really neat tool that I use for color toning, again, as I mentioned, not having a specific color palette, is in the color balance tool. You have the very easy task of color grading really quickly using the initial color palette that the image already provides. For example, sometimes the easiest thing is to look at what colors the makeup has in store for that image and basing it off that way. So for instance, we have, you know, these really beautiful purple, deep purple eyeshadow that I think I want to play off of. I like this mood that she's evoking. So for instance, we can go into our shadows. We can drop down this little color picker here and add a little bit of magentas into our shadows. And then to complement that, you see our midtones. We can push some of those warm tones and skin tones a little bit further, going into the yellows and offsetting that. And then to our highlights, We can do something complementary because we see here that we have our purples and magentas. We can go the other way to create a harmonious look. And just like that, if I do a quick new variant here, we've created a little color grade here that's quite effective and very easy to apply to a series of images. So for example, if I like this color tone and I want to quickly apply it to something else, there's two ways to go about this. I can come up here, say copy adjustments from this variant. I can come over to, say, Tina's file and say paste variant, and then suddenly we've applied that color grade from one image to another image without really doing anything. Another thing we can do with this, if we like something we've done with our color, we can effectively also save it as a preset. So I can come over to our preset dialog box. I can save a preset. I can say save. I can say Tina, who's very courteous, beautiful, beautiful work, and come over to maybe another image. Come down here, and then we have our Tina that easily gets dropped into what we're trying to do. So how's everything looking from our audience? Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, I've been beavering away in the background, asking some others. Just a general point, Brandy asked if there was any other follow-along tutorials. What we'll do is you'll get a follow-up email tomorrow about roughly around this time. So we'll get together some links between us to put those in.
Right.
So, you know, the things that you've done and the things I've done and our YouTube channel and so on. So we make a compendium of stuff that you can look at as well, because it's impossible to do everything in 1 hour. This is really a taste of what's possible.
It is definitely a taste, and that's why I love hearing from people and kind of what they're looking for, because it really shows, you know, you could pretty much do everything with this program that in terms of color that, you know, Photoshop could do. So it doesn't replace it completely, but it has so much power because you're taking use of the raw files and
absolutely
that way.
Absolutely. And a question from Brian, which I don't know if this is something you ever do, Pratik, but can you have two images up on screen at the time? So when you're making adjustments, you can compare to the original. So
yes.
Yeah.
So let me go ahead and show you really quickly. So let's say that Rajon Brand has an image we're working on, and we do something really beautiful, like really increase the exposure. That's so
Amazing.
Gorgeous. This is the style, by the way. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new variant. Okay, this is going to be the original, and this is the process version. If I just hit Command or Control and click on both of them, you see both of our images.
Yep.
And so the image that we want to use or modify, we just select it, and then we can go on with our business and go, you know what? No, I think that was a little bit too harsh. You know, I think the editor said no, and their screen was uncalibrated or whatever the case is, and do it that way. So it's really easy to play around.
There's another trick you can do as well.
Oh, yes.
If you just select one of those images, doesn't matter which one, and hit Command Enter, I think. Nope, Shift Enter.
Shift Enter.
There we go. So brilliant. You see the one on the left is locked as a compare variant, it's called. So if you just pick any other image, just one more, then that stays locked.
Oh, perfect.
To the left. So if you have like a reference image, or you want to match, you know, a grade from one image to another, then that's called the compare variant. So to find that in the menu, if you just go up to Edit Pratik,
Edit Pratik,
you've got Set as Compare and Clear Compare. So if you do Clear, then it will just take it away.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, it's very handy.
That is really handy, because especially if you have, you know, the same thing happening across multiple images, you want to just fine tune that happens, because sometimes you apply a look, but between the images you have maybe flash issues. Maybe you're not using, like, you know, the best flashes, and they're having multiple white balances and so forth and so on.
Absolutely.
Yes. One really interesting question that I want to address today is creating a look for these, like, it's this metallic, not black and white, not color images that we get requested in editorials quite a bit. And the reason I bring this up is because when you have images that you're not sure of whether it should be black and white or in color, you can actually have the best of both worlds. And I think it's really useful because in an image like this with Rejan, it's really striking in color, but it's also striking in black and white. And I wasn't sure which way to go with this. So I figured, you know what, another idea to give people that I will typically do, and this is something that I see a lot in editorials, especially with fashion editorials or commercial work. If you go to my website, solsticeretouch.com, and you go to my commercial section, I apply this look quite a bit, not necessarily for beauty, but for lifestyle work or for, you know, anything commercial, for advertising. And the base idea is that initially we will desaturate the image quite heavily, say about, you know, 30 or so on the slider here, maybe a little bit more. And what it does is it basically mutes the oversaturated tones that they really distract the eye from the mood. Because if you notice a lot of commercial images, it's all about the mood. Sometimes it's about the subject, what they're selling. It really focuses on the texture and the lighting and everything like that without removing the color completely. And then from there on is bringing the qualities of the black and white to the image itself. Now what I mean by that is maybe adding a little bit more contrast to emphasize the texture, also adjusting the clarity. So for example, here we have the clarity slider, which I like quite a bit. Let's go ahead and bring up the clarity a little bit here. And obviously you wouldn't do this all the time to beauty images, but I'm using this as a general example, which I think is quite strong to do. The next thing that I typically will look into is in my luma curve. I'm going to experiment with adding more contrast accordingly and tinkering around with my highlights and shadow values. Another place to really experiment with brightness is, as we did before, over here under our color balance tab, we have brightness, a brightness slider in our highlights. And so we can pop that up here. And then in our shadows, we can also bring that down. And you can see the background just darken up quite heavily. So let's say that we go ahead and add a new variant, which means that's going to reset to default when we create a copy. You'll see the before and after. So let's say we take something like this and we can then make it a preset or a style. We can also copy this. And let's say we go ahead and add that effect to this image by Ryan. So there you go. It's more topical when it comes to a lot of commercial sports images where you want something really dark, moody, but not completely desaturated.
Just to interject while you have a slurp of water, a couple of people are asking about banding in images, and that's actually was on the, it's not on the images themselves, it's on the GoToWebinar compression stream.
Right.
But do you see banding a lot in some shots? Or?
You know what, I tend to see a lot of banding that happens whenever you start doing a lot of color work after the fact of processing. Right. That's one huge benefit of fixing banding. I'm doing the color work in the raw processor, is that because you have this full array of data, you can effectively fix that without creating any issues. Any color shifts that you do in the raw processor is not going to create banding once you've exported. But whenever you export the image and then start working on it, you are more susceptible to banding, even if it's 16-bit. You know, sometimes it does happen, and that's typically where it happens. Also, it's also your screen, like you mentioned, to the webinar itself.
Yeah, quite often banding is caused by screen calibration, doing too much Photoshop.
Right, doing too much.
But with any sort of modern camera and raw file, I'd be really surprised if you had banding at source. You'd have to really
try
muck it about in Capture One to see.
Yeah, because like, you know what, even if we tried to do it now, we added like a ton of contrast and whatever it is, and we zoomed in. You know what tends to happen is you don't see as much banding on our side as you do if you did this after the fact. It can be really dangerous. Perfect. Let's see what else. So one other thing I want to talk about, aside from color, which is on the same topic, is going to be about how to recover information and why I specifically use Capture One for this process. It has saved me a lot. And one thing that I would have a problem with is whenever I would recover information in any other program, I would get a lot of haloing that happens across the image. This was shot by Dan Fan, who's a good friend of mine I've known for years. He went to Taiwan recently and took this beautiful image at sunset. And I actually went through the same expedition of going up this mountain and taking an image around the same time. And because of the program, I was able to rescue information naturally without those halo effects and weird shadows and noise and all of that because of the algorithms. For example, in the HDR section of the color tab here, we have our shadow and highlight regions. The way this works is that obviously we adjust the shadows, and as you can see here, even though we are bringing the shadows quite heavily, there's no haloing that is happening across the range of our shadows and the highlights and the borders itself. So if I do this loop tool here, I bring up the shadows, I do the loop tool again, you'll notice that there's no haloing in the separation between the midtones, highlights, and the shadows. By the way, if you want to know what the loop tool is, it's up here, the third icon, and that's very effective, so you don't have to zoom in anymore to see if everything is perfect. One of the big upgrades on Capture 110 is the processing times have gotten really fast. We are working on a laptop right now, and surprisingly, it's been very fast, especially for tethering. So, for example, let's say that you bring up your shadows here. It's also easy to complement by adding clarity on top of that, just a little bit. I definitely don't recommend adding a ton of clarity, but even just a little bit itself, it respects the transitions beautifully. And then obviously also adding the luma curve is a beautiful quick little tip here. So as you can see, really quickly, we brought the information. We've still maintained the depth in the shadows by using luma. It doesn't spoil the colors of the original image in case you want to keep that natural feel. So if I say, let's say clone variant here. I should say not clone variant, but new variant. And we can compare the before and after really quickly. So really interestingly enough, we have this ability to bring out this information naturally. Again, you can also use layers to mask in certain areas. So if you want to mask in just the clouds, you can, and so forth and so on. This is basically just to give you different ideas of what you can do. And
I would say, and this was a comment from Conrad, amazing what can be recovered. And I think people, maybe, when you get as old as me and everything, you remember the limitations of the first digital cameras going back, to 6-megapixel, $40,000 systems and so on, which had no latitude in recovery. And now you can spend, under $1,000 on a camera and get pretty amazing raw data out of it. So
yeah.
So don't be what's the word I'm looking for? Don't be surprised really at what you can recover. There's so much information in raw files. You can really pull them around these days. So you can't damage the file. So just see what the limits are for your camera.
But interestingly enough, I had an old 5D that I used to shoot with actually quite a bit, and I brought some of those files back into the new Capture One, and actually I was able to tweak, pull and recover information that I did initially, just because the algorithms have changed.
Absolutely, because the raw converters developed too. So so Capture One 6, if we go back that far, which is not that old, 2012.
2012.
Yeah, 2012. 2011 to 2012, Capture One 6. And we're at 2017, so that's 7, 8, 9, 10, 4 revisions in that time. If you compare 6 to 10 now and what you can recover,
it's massive.
It's massive.
Yeah. And speaking on that regard, one last tip I want to show is that even when it comes to balancing, using layers to balance white balance, and I know that sounds like a tricky thing to say, but what I mean by that is, let's say you have an image that you really like, but you want to change the white balance of certain areas. I do this quite often. If I see an influence from maybe tungsten line one side and maybe flash on the other, and I really want to bring that more in sync, I can do that. And the way to do that is, let me use this as a quick example. This is by Hein, and he was courteous enough to present this amazing portrait that I just had this idea. So I'll create a new layer. I'll call this white balancing. That's a new circus act provided by me later on. I'll do the same thing. I'll quickly invert the mask. I'll go to my white balance. I'll shift the background to cold to match your eyes. Like I mentioned earlier about color toning and how it's important to use the colors within the scene to match each other. This is what I mean. So I'll go back to my local adjustments. I will invert the mask really quickly, and then I can say the eraser brush. Well, let's bring up the flow really quickly because I want to
got airbrush on there. You probably don't need that, I guess.
No, I'll take that off. And we'll just do draw mask really. Draw mask. We will change our flow opacity really high. Let me take my pen here really quickly. Click, click, click. There we go. And then we could do is just quickly bring back the white balance of the surrounding scene in case we feel that we want to bring back a colder white balance in the background. We can also change it so it's not as strong. So you can see here what tends to happen is I can balance different casts. Casts.
Cats too.
You can balance cats in here as well. I can also shift it to more magenta and so forth. You can also change the saturation level. So maybe you want to decrease the saturation of the background or increase the saturation, you can do it that way. And again, it's really neat, especially if you're dealing with recovering information, changing white balances, or even textures. So in this example, I'm going to use this layer as textures and bring out more details and specific textures. Invert that. Go to my clarity really quickly. Increase my clarity. I can invert that again. And then now with my handy little brush, just going to bring that down really quickly. I can emphasize the jewelry if I wanted to, as well as maybe some of the eyes and so forth.
I think a good difference between Lightroom Capture One here is that Capture One's more Photoshop-like in that you make a layer.
Yeah.
You draw a mask,
right.
And then the adjustments are active on that mask. Whereas Lightroom is, and you can argue what's the best solution. I think that they're just different. Whereas Lightroom, you're kind of working with brushes,
right?
So it's a different way to do it. Whereas Capture One is more Photoshop-like in its approach.
Right, it's quite intuitive, especially if you are coming from that region. You also have different palettes you can drag and drop things that you want, don't want, move them over, and it's really customizable, as you'll see from a lot of videos we'll send off afterwards for tutorials and so forth.
Can you go back to Heine's? Is it Heine?
Heine? Yeah.
This one, Heine. Sorry. Just Matthew wanted to see the mask.
Ah, yes.
So if you just hit M if you want as the shortcut. So there you go.
There you go. Yeah. And if you want to refine it more, you simply just go ahead and do it gently, as opposed to just quickly doing it as I did.
Yeah. And I'd say don't get too caught up in having super, correct me if I'm wrong, super accurate mask going around every single hair, because then it looks super obvious.
And also the other reason is that you can do that if you wanted to, as I'm doing here. But what happens is with light and color, especially when you are dealing with soft light, it tends to feather off into transitions. It doesn't just cut off.
Correct.
So you want to make sure that the mask is actually softer. And as you see, within just a couple of seconds, I'm able to refine that really quickly if you wanted to. So there you go.
And just to reiterate, Stefan doesn't get the point of inverting the mask. So
let's say we have a new layer here.
Have a new layer, yeah.
And let's say we do, what can we do here? Let's say we do a curve adjustment, right?
Okay. Yeah. Curve adjustment.
Let's say the original process is that, let's liken it to Photoshop layers, for example. Let's say we do a new adjustment layer in Photoshop or in Capture One. In the beginning, if you do a new adjustment layer, you typically would see the adjustment coming up.
In Photoshop.
That's right.
Yeah.
So in here, we don't as a start off.
Because we have no mask.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the reason that I inverted to begin with is so that I could see the parameters in which I want to set my curve or whatever it is that we're doing. So for this example, I want to set my curve to this degree. Maybe I want to bring up the shadows to this level of luminosity.
But you don't want to affect the face.
That's
for
right.
example. Yeah.
Right. So then I can go back And once I have my exact parameters set, I can then invert my mask and then paint in that specific area.
Yeah.
But if I didn't invert my mask to begin with, I don't know what parameters this would change.
You'd be shooting blind.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So again, it's not wrong or it's not right. This is not the only way to do it. If you prefer to keep it, prefer to keep your mask not inverted to begin with, you can certainly do it that way, especially if you know the exact number of whatever it is that you're trying to adjust in the beginning. But if you don't, that's a good way of visualizing your parameters.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for sharpness. Maybe right now I want to sharpen some areas and I can't visualize what this number means. I'm like, what does 522 mean? But if I've inverted this, I can physically see the sharpness level going into here and adjusting it that way. So you can see what that means. I'm like, well, that's too high. You know, I can see the exact number and what that relates to. I'm like, well, you know, I like that for the eyes. And then I can go back, invert the mask, and then I can start, you know, bringing back the eyes.
Because there's no point sharpening the entire image.
Exactly.
Generally. So, yeah. So I hope that answers Stefan and anyone else who was asking. Stefan said, well, I tend to set the mask first and set the parameters after, but you know, the issue with that is that you can't see what the parameter is doing.
Yeah.
Unless you know that.
Unless you're a genius.
A genius, yeah. Unless you know, okay, I visualize this needs X amount of sharpening or +2 stops or whatever.
Exactly, because I can then do also double parameters. So I can do like sharpness plus exposure parameter together and visualize it by, you know, keeping it inverted first.
And it's a great technique, and as I said, if you want to shortcut all of that, you can. So you can have shortcuts for adding layers, inverting mask, filling the mask, and so on. So it's just for showing you guys how it works. It's easier to show you in the menu system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But again, no two processes are alike. So
no, exactly. All
right, perfect.
Now, unfortunately, that's the first 60 minutes up.
Time has
already. Time has passed. I'll just throw a last.
Yes, please.
Few questions. Why isn't the mask inverted by default? Good question. Maybe that's something we could add at a later date. So.
Because I think, just like Stefan said, most people actually prefer keeping it solid, so that way they know, for example, because most changes that people do are just, you know, like dodge and burn, for example. So they put like dodge, and then they will just quickly, you know, bring up the curve. They don't really need to see it. No. Then they'll just go to town and paint.
start painting.
Right.
So it's probably 50% would want it one way, 50% the other.
That's exactly where it comes down to. Yeah. And plus, if you start the other way, people would think that you have to erase everything else except that area.
Yes.
So if you start dark like this, you can then just use the brush to quickly do the areas that you want.
That you need to do.
So it's a little like like a shortcut that we did.
And if you want good dodging and burning tips, then say 2 weeks ago we had a different guest, Michael, who went through a whole process of dodging and burning in Capture One.
So you can so you can see here I'm dodging, burning, and just adding highlights and details, and you know, keeping that mask black has its benefits as well.
Yes.
So it's more a line of giving people ideas of you know, what you should do as a starting point.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, make inverted mask as a default in the preferences. There we go.
Good idea. This is why we do webinars, right? So we can get feedback from people.
Exactly. Just the last couple of questions, and then we'll switch to more business side of things.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, seeing as we were talking about dodging and burning, so you tend to use the luma curve for changing your density as opposed to exposure or something like that?
I do. In fact, you know, whenever I dodge and burn through Capture One specifically, I try to keep it with the luma curve itself. I've found that it has given me more accurate results on a lot of tones. There are some instances where I'll stick to RGB, especially if it needs to respect any saturation shifts.
Right.
So it's going to be dependent on the image. Now, I found that if you have images that are not as saturated to begin with, RGB seems to be fine, but when you have images like this where you have a lot of contrast that happens and a lot of saturation shifts going across the image, luma tends to hold those values really respectively.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, so for those of you watching the webinar, if you switch your minds now to, I mean, you can still ask about Capture One as well as you of course, but if there's anything else kind of that is a bit more out of left field that you want to ask Pratik and Bella as well, then now is the time to do it. Shall I put the webcam back on? So
yeah.
And we're adjusting. Apparently, it was a bit low before, so we'll point it up again in a second. Let's see.
There you go. Hi, hello. Hello, internet.
Let's see what we can actually see. Oh, there we go. You can see my shoulder.
Yeah, let's do it. Bring your.
Let's get cozy.
Let's get cozy. So I'm going to be slightly off camera just so I can look at the questions panel. Oh, question which came up earlier. Thank you, Ralph, for giving us a pre-prepped question. He said he's heard several times that people use Lightroom to get results quickly, you know, conversion of many images, and maybe Bella, you're probably a good source for this because you've used Lightroom, but the best quality comes to Capture One. What do Bella and Pratik feel about it?
Well, I think Capture One, and then it's not just because we're doing this.
yeah, paid to do it.
Yeah, honestly. But no. I think that the thing that really converted me was when I opened up a raw file in Lightroom and I opened up a raw file in Capture One. And if you just have those two images open side by side, then I think that will convert anybody. Capture One processes raw in a really beautiful way. The colors, for me, I always thought they were just a little bit richer. There's a bit more depth. And then the ones in Lightroom and even like Photoshop Raw, if you open it up there, they're quite like flat. There's almost like a little bit of a grayness to it.
It is, yeah. I feel like it doesn't respect skin tones as readily.
Yeah, so it's just that really. If you just open up an image in like Lightroom and you open up Capture One, then you can decide for yourself. And I usually find that that converts a lot of people.
Yeah,
You've
got nothing to lose by trying, really. That's the thing. So 30-day trial for Capture One, totally free.
Yeah,
so
and then you get addicted, and then you can't let go.
And then we reel you in. Yes.
Yeah, because once you know how to use a program, it's not that difficult. It's just like everything's right there in the panels. You can tweak them, like Pratik showed you earlier. We can just pull the tabs out and adjust them to what works best for you.
Specifications. That's right. That's right.
And then it just makes processing in Capture One actually quite easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and quite quick.
Yeah, so the interface is quite logical when you get used to where everything is. And if you are also coming from the Lightroom side, on my course I have a section specifically catered to transitioning from Lightroom to Capture One for people who were like me in the beginning who didn't know where things were. I likened certain areas to each other as well.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good question. Back to Capture One briefly. Well, we were on Capture One. We'll do business question next. Brett was asking, can you use the luma curve to target shadows, midtones, and highlights when dodging and burning, like dodging and burning in Photoshop?
Absolutely. In fact, even more so because since we're dealing with the raw data, it's not going to be capped. Because in Photoshop, when you're dodging and burning, if you notice with curves, you're capping that. You're capping where the information is going to be affected. With this one, because we have a lot of information within the shadows still available, having that luma curve with the dodge and burn still allows you to bring out detail that you would not be able to do on the dodge and burn stage in Photoshop. Yep,
there's no reason why you can't. You can even do maybe not dodging and burning, but local shadow and highlight recovery. So if you make a layer and then just boost up shadow recovery in the HDR tool, and then you can brush on highlight and shadow recovery.
Because in the program, since the recovery tools aren't useless, you know, they're actually very powerful.
Really.
The algorithms are quite nice. Even for Bella's work, we sometimes will take a variant, bring up the information, and then just play with.
That's right.
Play with it.
Yeah.
How do you? Question of all questions. How do you accurately price retouching projects? Do you guesstimate hours and base it on an hourly rate?
I base it, actually kind of. What I do is actually get the project first. I'll see the information, the images, the deadlines, what they're looking for essentially. I'll tell them to communicate with me. Is it just the skin work? Is it the hair work? Are there any other details you want me to take care of? And then price it based on that. So if I know a project's going to take me an hour and a half, then it's going to be by your hourly rate times an hour and a half. And that way, they get a clear idea of exactly how much it's going to cost them so that they can communicate with their clients or whatever it is with their budget that they need to get cleared for retouching.
Yeah. Vigilis Pratik says your retouching beauty and portraits course is fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, there you go. Delighted to see Capture One in it. That was just thank you. There we go. Let's see. Oh, Adam was asking. I know you've seen these. Do you ever use the control panels, the tangent panel, or just Wacom and keyboard as such?
You know what? We actually used the tangent panels with David, and they were so addicting because you really felt like you're a colorist when you're working on them. So if you're doing weddings or high batch images, I think that's a great way to go.
Yes. Yeah, I think and if nobody has a clue what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, right.
Tangent panels, they're basically hardware input panels, so knobs, dials, sliders, trackables for the color balance tool, which has a direct input into Capture One.
Yeah.
So for high volume work, you can buzz through images very quickly. You don't need any of the tools visible for it to work.
Yeah.
It just does. So
it looks exactly like the color balance tool, right?
But physical.
Physical version. And there's an iPad version as well.
Yes, there's also an iPad version. So tangentwave.co.uk. So
it looks really cool.
Yeah.
Go UK.
It looks like a spaceship when you have them all out in front.
Yeah, it does.
Brian says happy birthday, Bella.
Oh, thank you very much.
Send her birthday messages.
Fixing skin defects, Capture One or Photoshop? Photoshop, I guess.
I do it primarily in Photoshop because I can then undo them when I do my whole retouching process. I tend to use Capture One specifically for global changes or color changes, things like that, exposure changes, and then export to Photoshop so that maybe even the clients can have the layers to play with as well, which is quite useful.
Good question from Marco, and actually a few others have asked as well, like how much work in Capture One compared to Photoshop, and I've heard other retouchers say, well, it actually depends on who it's been delivered to and what kind of work it's for.
I'll be honest, sometimes, you know, when I import images from a client, they like to shoot very neutrally, so they don't do a lot of color toning. So what happens is in those circumstances, I'll make sure the details are all fixed. I'll make sure that I'll use the color editor tab with the skin tones to get that skin really nice and even before doing any retouching. So it could either be 5 minutes or it could be somewhere between 10 minutes. You know, it just depends what we're trying to do. If it's creating a color grade or a color look, then it'll be processed through Capture One and I'll send to the client for previews, get approved, and then retouch. Or if they decide that they want me to do the color look after the fact, in case clients want to go back and forth, I'll just export a neutral copy, then do my retouching, then the color grading on top in Photoshop. So it really depends. You have to know your client and expectations, but if at all possible, I will try to do it in Capture One. But lastly, sometimes clients will send EIP files, which is prepackaged files readable through Capture One, which are basically raw files plus settings in a nice little one file package, and they'll send that to me. It automatically loads the settings, and then we'll use that with variants to kind of play with subtleties that need to be combined in Capture One. So again, the answer is relative. So that's there you go, full explanation.
Zohar says, when are you getting a new MacBook Pro?
You know what, I'll be honest, we were playing with it today. It actually handled pretty much everything well, only had 16 gigabytes RAM, and surprisingly, it's been doing things quite nicely, so I'll keep you updated on that one.
It looks pretty too.
Yeah.
Looks pretty.
Yeah, it looks pretty.
So, I've been happy with it. I've also just literally...
Yeah, we have all
we have all the toys today. This nice Wacom Mobile Studio Pro, which I'm going to write a blog post about.
It's really
it's so pretty.
It's stunning and incredibly fast, running Capture One really nicely. So if a handy little mobile tether station or for retouching on airplanes.
That's right. You could tether with that.
Yeah, you could tether directly to this. Yeah. USB on the side. I mean, iPad Pro is kind of not really the same as that because you can't connect anything to it. Whereas this is, a fully functional
operating system.
Plus
Windows
ports.
10 with.
Is it very heavy?
It's solid, but it's not like crazy.
Yeah, it's not too bad, is it?
No.
Just like use one finger.
So retouches mobile dream. So and running Capture One really nicely. So
the times we live in.
Yeah.
Back in my day.
Pablo was asking, have you got the Capture One shortcut keyboard? Which You should get you one of
The
those.
tangent one, not yet.
No, there's a shortcut keyboard for Capture
Oh
One.
right, yeah, the
Yeah.
Logic one.
The Logic keyboard.
Right, yeah, not yet, but
It's
right.
good if you're new to Capture One and you can't remember shortcuts.
Yeah, it has everything listed for
Yeah,
you.
printed on the keyboard in color code.
Yeah, it looks really good.
Yeah, so from any Phase 1 part, basically. Let's see. Just a quick one. Does Capture One take advantage of the touch bar? Not yet, the new touch bar, but shortly after it was launched, our developers actually went to, would you believe, a touch bar conference
Really?
run by Apple.
Oh.
And it's kind of a gimmicky thing, but potentially you could do quite a lot with it shortcut-wise.
Ah.
So we don't know what's going to happen with it yet, but I think you could say, regardless of whether it's Capture One or Photoshop or whatever, gradually I think developers will start picking up using it because it is useful.
Right,
So,
that you could do.
Well,
I
they're
mean,
holding conferences. They certainly
Yeah.
have a vision for
so
it.
basically, it's not going anywhere. It's going to be there, and then it's going to be updated soon.
Yeah,
exactly.
exciting.
David was asking, have you used Affinity Photo, either of you?
You know, it's
We were just talking about that.
yeah, we
Yeah,
were just
earlier.
talking about
Yeah.
that. I actually tried it out again a couple of weeks ago, and I found out that it's still too slow. That just killed it for me. The second I opened it up and started using the healing brush,
Right.
Yeah.
it didn't keep up with how fast I was sourcing and trying to brush. So that was kind of a bummer for me. And also the raw processor really is not very good. So you can try it out. I mean, I honestly, it's really bad in terms of how the raw processing is. And so after those two things, it was kind of pointless for me to even use as alternative Photoshop or anything.
But I think it's gonna improve as well, considering
so. Yeah.
how new it is and how
Yeah.
far it's come. So
It's come quite far,
it's
hasn't
good to
it?
have
Yeah.
competition.
Yeah.
So, does Bella have any books of her work?
No, not yet, but we're actually just in talks right now with the publisher. So,
Great.
yeah, not yet. It's something that I've been wanting to bring to life for a while.
Kind of work that should be printed. Really,
Yeah,
isn't it?
yeah. I always love seeing. I get excited seeing my work in print, and I really kind of want other people to experience that as well.
Yeah, so hopefully when we get it up, you'll have some sort of newsletter maybe.
Yeah. So yeah, we're talking to publisher, but I think we still have a way to go on that. So
Send support to your
Yeah, send
local
support.
publisher. Yeah. Could you just go up to the help menu for me, Pratik, as you're closest? Bruce was asking, is there a shortcut card for keyboard shortcuts? So if you just hit keyboard shortcut summary, wrong screen. Yeah, drag it over. So basically, if you do that, you end up with your current set of keyboard shortcuts.
great.
Because you can define your own as well. So Bruce, if you want to print that out and stick it to your bathroom mirror, then that's the way to go.
Stick a shortcut to everyone's forehead, so every day as you talk, you can memorize it one by one.
Let's see. Vijela says Affinity is amazing. Okay, there we go. So maybe it's
maybe it's
Yeah,
my
that
laptop.
works for you.
Maybe it's my really bad laptop. I need to change.
Yeah.
So how does Bella and Pratik deal with storage and backup?
Oh, good question.
I have loads of hard drives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hard drives and cloud.
Yeah.
So between those two.
Yeah. While I'm traveling, I have two 1 terabyte SSDs, and I use those as backups, temporary backups, not archival. So what I do is, as I'm working on files, I'll store and work and run those files on the native SSD hard drive on my laptop, and then every day, a couple of times a day, you can do it through Time Machine or whatever program you have to automatically sync the data on your laptop to the two backups.
Yeah.
And I tend to do that. And when the hard drive gets full, I'll also export the files out onto another hard drive and then mirror that as well. So my backup has everything that's mirrored from my laptop itself, as well as files that are done and need to be archived. So then when I get back home, I can then offload them into a Synology or whatever it is that you prefer. But again, have redundancy, and have redundancy and make sure your files are mirrored. As well as offsite as well.
Yeah, so it's similar to you. I have two hard drives that everything gets backed up on, and then all of my final edits, so all my final pictures, I should go up to my SmugMug account.
Yeah.
Because my account has unlimited image uploading.
Right.
So everything just goes on there, and I always have files again wherever I am, whenever I'm traveling.
That's right. You have a portable. You have a portable portfolio, so you can download stuff.
Yeah. All my images, once I finish editing them, no matter what they are, they go straight onto SmugMug.
Yeah.
Just in the gallery, and yeah.
Yeah.
That's my cloud storage sorted out right
there. Couple of people asking about your various social media handles and stuff. So what we do in the follow-up, sorry, I'm off the slide. What we do in the follow-up email is put links to all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Sure.
So roughly this time tomorrow you'll get a follow-up email. We'll put in ways to follow you, and also
great.
Other tutorials and that kind of stuff as well. So just to mention that. And the recording of this, it goes on YouTube, and the link for that will be on there as well. There was a good question here, I just have to find it. Okay, this was from Leighton, it was. There was a recent post on your Instagram, I think this is yours, Bella. Grey tone image with mesh and flowers, or maybe that was the competition one.
That was mine. Yes.
How would you retouch skin texture whilst retaining the texture of the mesh on top?
Yeah,
very tiny brush.
Yeah, well, people were just asking about that. The first two
this
comments,
one, that's the one of
yeah. Basically, if you go to my Instagram, Solstice Retouch, you'll see an image at this current date, which is what's the date today?
2030.
Something like
March 30th.
Yeah.
Yeah. 30th.
Go to that post and you'll see an image by Vara Papas, who is a beauty shot. There's lace on top of it.
Yeah, it's a beautiful shot.
People ask me, how do you retouch under lace? And the basic mechanism on how to do that, I talked about that in my RGG tutorial for beauty and portrait retouching, is how to retouch no matter how bad the skin is or no matter what problems you have, is primarily good workflow for the healing brush and a good workflow for understanding how to dodge and burn really quickly, which I talk about in that course. So I can't get into this here, but check it out, because once you learn how to do that effectively, you can retouch anything. I kid you not, and you'll be retouch superhero.
A couple of people said, oh no, that's a good question. Sorry, I was talking nonsense. Bella is such an inspiring person. That's great. This is from Christelle, as well as her work. Where do you guys find inspiration, and how did you find your personal style in editing?
Ooh, do you want to start off?
What's your question?
Oh.
She said nah.
Yes, nothing to do with Pratik.
Okay. Well, I guess inspiration really for me just comes from nature. As anyone who follows my work, you definitely know. Yeah, nature and flowers in spring. I was thinking that perhaps in a last life I was Japanese, because we both share this love for spring and like this moment in time that's so fleeting and so beautiful. So that's usually where a lot of my inspiration comes from. But then at the same time, when I was little, I used to read a lot of fantasy novels. So I would get lost in like worlds where there were like queens, fairies, dragons, a lot of strong female protagonists that were having adventures in, you know, faraway lands. And I think that's the kind of vibe that I bring on board as well. So yeah, I don't write, but essentially my stories, I like to think of them as little, like my pictures are little stories. So yeah, and then when it comes to color toning, that style I think really just evolved over time, through practice and just I guess analysis. Like when you analyze your own work, and you're like, oh, this works and that doesn't work, and that happens in time when you're shooting regularly and you're editing regularly as well. And you start paying attention to what does and doesn't work. You start like moving towards a style or a series of adjustment preferences that you are attracted to, and they will then become your style. So yeah, I guess it just happened very, very organically. But I think that's the thing, isn't it? Like for anybody who wants to create personal work, just start pulling from things that you find naturally attractive, that are interesting to you, and start bringing them into your photography or anything you do. And yeah, you'll go far, I think, when it comes to personal work, especially. Yeah, find something that identifies with you, and just see what happens.
That's true.
Yeah.
So be organic like the flower you are.
Be the flower you are.
Yeah.
Oh my God, what a quote.
She loves it.
The very first question that was asked
Oh.
before we even started was
Right.
from John, which was a good one, which was, I think, always good to hear.
Mm-hmm.
What was your background before the
Ah.
heady world of retouching and photography?
We both have different backgrounds.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I was a, what was I, a
You were.
photographer? No, I was so I did a few things. First, I did Photoshop for fun. I didn't really do it professionally in the beginning, obviously, but I used to have a background in business through college, and my retouching career only began about when I started college or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been doing Photoshop for about, gosh, I don't even want to think about it now. 16 years.
Oh God, that long.
10? No, 16.
Photoshop.
No, yeah.
0.5.
So I used to do stuff before memes was a thing. I used to make memes before memes happened. And that's basically how I started. So from that, I just explored my art background and combined the love of everything: photography, art, memes, and then just put together and then ran with it.
Mm. Yeah, and then I actually was an architect before I was a photographer, and I picked up photography not really as a way to get better at photography. I actually picked it up to become better at Photoshop, funnily enough, and that was so that I could learn how to use Photoshop and apply it to my course so I could become better at channeling my ideas to everybody. But then I fell in love with the art of creating.
And me too, right?
And this one here.
So you left a lucrative career to become a photographer. Yeah.
Yep, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. But yeah, it's a tough journey, that actually. That's another whole discussion altogether.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always a tough decision.
Like when do you leave a well-paying, steady-paying job?
Yeah.
So
to do photography,
yeah.
but it's possible. And you
it
showed
is
that.
possible. Yeah.
I don't know this place, but Paul was asking if you were offered a place for internship at Silhouette Studio in New York, would you go?
Oh,
I think Paul's been offered as an internship. Do you know Silhouette Studio?
I don't, but I would actually recommend, first and foremost, if it's a credible studio, and which sounds like it is, I would definitely consider it, because being an intern somewhere is probably the best way to learn how to do best industry practices, whether it is the actual business side, because it's not just techniques, okay? No. I'll tell you first and foremost, retouching business is not just techniques. It's actually the business side, the marketing side, how to communicate with clients, how to make sure they're satisfied, what they're looking for effectively. Because if you stick to just what other retouchers are doing, chances are you're not going to get the best source of advice, because I'll tell you, some clients are not looking for what other retouchers are doing. They're looking for a very specific look, and how do you accompany these different styles in the real world is different than the best showmanship that a retoucher can do. It's a whole different world. So yes, if you have an opportunity, try and be an intern first, and at least an assistant, and go that way.
And that goes the same for photography. Yeah, it really does. Like, the best way is to learn from somebody else.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean just go and ask questions and abuse their knowledge, but it does mean step up, pay attention, help out, assist, and be so open to education that's just going to filter to you.
Right.
So yeah.
And that's how you grow like the flower you are, right?
Oh my God.
Sorry, I did. Okay, sorry, no more flower plants. Okay.
And Rajesh was just saying, he says hello from Dallas.
Yes, Jess.
And he was shooting last weekend with a lady who told him that you were from Houston, which is
great.
There you
well,
go.
Come down to Houston. We'll have fun, all of us.
Yep. Let's see. For David, I got a question.
Yes.
Do you have any resources available for high volume workflow in Capture One?
Yes, you do.
Yes, we do. Yes. And as I said, we'll put some links in the follow-up email, which you'll get tomorrow.
Yeah, so, perfect.
There's actually a lot of resources coming on now. We have the Creative Live, of course, stuff we've done with RGD. We've got our own YouTube channel. There is a book, Capture 1.9 book. It's shortly to be updated, I'm sure, as well. But
that's
even a lot of the Capture One book by Rocky Nook publisher is great. Well worth getting that right now.
Yes.
And there's also Luminous Landscape tutorials. There's a Linda tutorial. There's in French and German video to brain tutorials.
Oh.
So there's loads.
There's all kinds of
Wow.
stuff. So
Brilliant.
it's just a matter of finding it, of course. But don't think there isn't much out there, because there's actually
Right.
a whole heap of material.
Mhm.
So
You should have like a page where everything's there.
we do actually.
Yeah.
We do have
Oh,
a
perfect. There you go.
community page on our website, but it needs actually more update, because a lot has happened since we
Great.
did that.
Awesome.
So, okay. I think, what are we at? We're at 1 minute past 5:30, and we're going to get kicked out our rented studio soon. Where can I get a Capture One shirt? You have to bribe me for a Capture One shirt. Ricardo says, the most informative webinar you've had. Great.
Oh, congrats!
Fantastic.
I'm really
Woo!
happy. And ultimately, you know, I like to make sure that whatever I know is accessible. So if you have questions, post it out there, and you know, people are always happy to answer and help, even if we didn't cover everything in 1 hour. Obviously, you
Yeah.
can't. But I'm glad you
No,
guys enjoyed
exactly. It's impossible. You know, like the Creative Life course I did was 2 days. You
And
know,
still
RGG
Mm.
course
it. Right, it's a
is
long,
Yeah.
a long time, so it does take a while to absorb any application.
Yeah.
So practice
So-
makes perfect.
Yeah, but it's not scary.
No,
Like,
no.
at all.
No, you can't break images. You've got nothing to
Yeah.
lose by
Yeah.
trying.
And I always say that if I can do it, so can anyone else.
Right. And again, all this is taste and opinion. It's not fact. So
Yes.
when you do these things, and you see me doing these things, or anybody,
Mhm.
you know, if you disagree with something, that's great, because then you can create your own style from that.
Yeah.
So it's good to disagree, but
There's-
also develop from it.
10 different ways to do the same thing.
Mhm.
Capture One. All of them equally as correct,
Right.
if
Yeah.
you like. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. Just to finish, while we've got the captive
Yes.
audience,
Okay.
I'm just gonna, let's just kill our webcam for a second.
Sure.
And I just want to put up, in case we haven't totally scared you off, and you saw a little bit of it that Pratik was doing about local adjustments, and some of you asked, how do I, you know, draw masks and create masks and so on. So if you want to come back, it's just me next week, sadly.
No,
No.
that's a great yeah.
Then that will be just all about local adjustments. The link, if you want to register for that, will be in the follow-up email as well. So don't worry about having to find that. It'll be in that follow-up email too. So join me for that if you can. So as I said before we get kicked out, I just put the camera back on so we can wave at everyone. So thanks very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure. So it's, you know, it's amazing how quickly 90 minutes goes.
Right, always.
Thank you for joining us.
It's my
Thank you for
pleasure.
having us.
Yeah,
Hope
really.
everybody found it beneficial and took away some good pieces of information.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you could at least take away one thing from this, that's all I hope for.
Exactly.
And again,
Exactly.
play and play and play and have fun. And this is all about having fun. So thank you guys so
Yeah.
much for joining, and hopefully see you next time.
Yes. See you next time.
Bye.
See you later. Bye.